Uh-oh.
All right. Hello there, everybody. This is Ben with Empires Comics here in Sacramento, California. And we are doing another Google Hangout talking to creatives who are not local, who we want to know more about their works, where they came from, what they've got going on. And tonight we are talking with Karl Kerschl, who is actually the farthest guest we've had so far, dialing in from Japan. Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Karl.
Thanks for having me.
Now, it's 6 p.m. over here in Sacramento, California. What time is it there for you?
It's 10 a.m. here. I'm in the future by, what is that? Like, I know from the East Coast, I think it's like 13 hours, so 16 hours ahead of me.
Okay.
Right now.
Yep, that sounds about right. And well, thank you for joining us then, because I know how the mornings can be sometimes. You've got a lot on your plate. You've got things you got to get done, and you're taking an hour out to talk to us. So thank you.
No, it's my pleasure. It's a perfect time, actually. I drop kids off at school, and then I come back here, have a cup of coffee or something, and I'm fresh. It's better in the morning for me anyway, yeah.
That's perfect. Before they get off school again, and then you just rinse and repeat.
Right, exactly.
So then let me just talk for a moment about you being in Japan, because I'm curious as to why you're in Japan, since I know that you were born in Canada, and what brought you over to Japan?
I was born in Toronto. I lived in near Niagara Falls for most of my life, and then I moved to Montreal, met my wife, got married. I've been living in Montreal for the past bunch of years, and my wife is half Japanese, and she taught here in Japan years before I met her, with a program called the JET program. It's like assisting English teachers here. And she wanted to do it again, and the kids were a certain age. I've got two children, and they were an age where we thought it wouldn't be a terrible time to take them out of school in Canada and come here for a year. So she reapplied. She's assistant teaching here again. Both my kids are in Japanese schools. They've just been kind of dumped in. They knew a bit of Japanese from their grandmother before now, but now they're just in school here and basically just speaking Japanese all day long. So it's and I'm just sitting in the apartment here working at home, so I can work from anywhere. But that's why I'm here. We thought we'd do it for a year, and honestly, like I'm back. I think we leave in August. I'm back in Canada in August, but I'll be really sad to go. I would stay longer if I could.
It doesn't mean you won't be back. I mean, it's a pretty neat opportunity. I mean, for you obviously too, because you can do your work from anywhere. But for the kids, it's pretty neat because they're going to be picking up quite a bit.
They already have. It's been incredible. I could work from basically anywhere with an internet connection. It's hard to, once you say no to the extended contract, I think it'd be hard to come back for this amount of time with this, relative level of ease, because the government sets up so much for you in terms of like residence and visas and stuff like that. But I do plan to return.
Nice. But it's back home now, and which is we just had talked to Brendan Fletcher a few weeks ago, and if anybody doesn't know, these two are it's a comic book creation romance story. I mean, you guys grew up together. You love the same things. You were able to come into comic books as creators and work together. Tell me more about all of that.
I guess I had a history as a comic book reader before I met Brendan, but I think I met him. It was a very casual relationship with comics. I mean, my mom would bring stuff home for me. You'd get those 3 packs of comics from the local dollar store or whatever. And so I didn't really have any affinity toward anything specific. I would just read whatever showed up. I met Brendan when I was 10 years old, I think. We were in grade 6. And we bonded over stuff like Voltron and Transformers and G.I. Joe and stuff like that. And then after that, a show called Robotech, which was basically like an Americanized adaptation of Macross, which is a Japanese anime. And then also we kind of Brendan got into superhero stuff in a bigger way. Like he basically found he found out that you could go to a dedicated comic store, which I had no idea existed, and go once a week and get new stuff. And so he introduced some new comics to me, and just the concept of being able to go and do that. And then I became hooked, and we just shared tastes from that point. I guess we shared tastes prior to that, but when we were in high school, we would spend a lot of time going to the comic store, buying books, talking about stories, and then trying to make our own stories. And we found that we were very really simpatico in terms of like the kinds of stories we liked, and the kind of things we wanted to see. So we tried making.
You remember
our own, yeah.
The first comic book story you discovered?
The first comic book story that
the first comic book store that you discovered. Speaking of finally like having this.
Yes, sure. It was called Memory Lane Comics, and there was one in actually there was not one yet in the town I was in, because we had to drive 20 minutes away to the town of St. Catharines, where I remember going on the weekends, because Brendan had told me where it was, and he didn't really know street names or anything. He just told me based on signage, and so I had to direct my dad to drive me there, and it took us a long time to find, but I was really excited once I found it.
It's like an eye-opening experience.
For sure, yeah, and that was a big one. And so I would go there every weekend when I could, and then later on I would try to make trips. My grandfather took me to the Silver Snail comic store in Toronto, which was a huge one. That was 2 floors. I remember going in there and just having my mind blown by the amount of. But just when I discovered there was a whole other floor full of toys and models and stuff, I freaked out.
You already thought it was big enough, and then you discover that.
It was amazing enough that there was a store, much less a store with 2 floors full of toys and things.
That's fantastic. Then you talked about you guys, talking about creating and playing around with the ideas. Were you already dabbling in art back then? Were you immersed in it, or is it something that you picked up later?
I was drawing already. Like I spent a lot of my childhood drawing stuff, usually just like reproducing art I liked from comics or from toys, like drawing a lot of Transformers box art or He-Man stuff or whatnot, a lot of Voltron. I never considered myself a storyteller until Brendan and I started knocking ideas around. And then it's funny, when you start doing that, your brain sort of shifts into a story creation mode, in that like things that you experience or see or hear become fodder for story in a way that they never had been before. So I think you just sort of train yourself to like intake stuff and sort of adapt it or mold it into potential chunks of story or concepts or things like that. So that probably happened when I was 15, that I don't know, like around that time, 15 or 16 years old, and then it hasn't really ever changed.
Okay, so once you started seeing things in a different perspective, once you started actually thinking like a creator, you just adapt to anything that happened, around you, anything you watched. And so, I mean, what you're saying is something that's inspirational to some people who consider themselves not to be creative like that. It is a learned process.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I think anyone could learn to be a storyteller. Like it's just kind of shifting your perspective or your intention a little bit. I was drawing all the time. I mean, like that part of it I've been doing since as long as I can remember, but it wasn't, I think it was, I didn't take it seriously in terms of career until I think, like the kind of late 80s, early 90s comics boom. Like it was really like Jim Lee's X-Men and Liefeld's X-Force and all that stuff, and McFarlane that got me back into comics in a way in a way that I thought it was possible, a possible career route. And then then my drawings became more focused, and I became more intent on just learning the craft of actual sequential art. You know, before that it was just drawing characters and things, and then it was around probably the time I was 16 years old when I started focusing that into a career path.
And there really is a big difference between being able to do a pinup and being able to do sequential art. Is there anything you did other than just reading the comic books that helped you with that?
There's a huge difference. It's like night and day. I always think of because I have friends that I've tried to, you know, coach or help, who have come to me for help, and I always think of drawing comics like a golf swing. I'm not really a golfer, but I mean, if anyone describes a golf swing to you, it's like 13 or 14 different things you have to consider while you're going through that swing.
Yeah.
And I think of creating comics the same way, because because there are so many things. It's like writing, directing, producing, and editing a film. You know, like it's just a lot of stuff to consider on every page, because you're responsible for so much of and acting in it, frankly. Like, I mean, you have to get the characters to behave and act in a certain way. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to consider. I think at the time there was, like, the internet was not really a thing, so I had to track people down or look for advice here and there. And I had the usual books recommended to me, like How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, and Will Eisner's Comics and Sequential Art, which is an incredible resource. Both those books are great in different ways. I focus more on learning proper anatomy and perspective, and honestly, just putting together pages of sequential art over and over again was enough to, was just good training. And then I take those pages and show them to different professionals at conventions and things, and it was extremely helpful. Like, the first pages I took anywhere were to the 1992 Chicago Comic-Con, which is when I think Image first debuted. And I showed those pages to some of the Image guys at the time, like Jim Valentino and Eric Larson. And they were extremely generous with their time and supportive. And those pages are awful. I mean, if I look at them now, they're terrible. And but I mean, I got a lot of good pointers. I got pointed in the right direction, and I just kept doing that until they got better. And now, now you can do that anyway. You can do that online now. You can find resources everywhere for that sort of thing.
And this is all your work that you're doing without, just to get your foot in the door, to get some criticism, to show it to people.
Yeah.
So wow, that is a lot of extra work. Do you have any of those pages still sitting around?
I'm sure I do. I have them in my closet in my old room back at my parents' house, I think.
Sweet, where they will stay, I imagine.
They will stay, yeah. I mean, I sometimes I think it would be fun to, like, put them online or something, but I don't know. I have to get over the embarrassment hurdle. They're pretty terrible. But in fact, it didn't. I only did that for a couple of years before I actually got my first work. I think I got my first work when I was 18 or something, and it was with a very small, because of the time that I was learning this stuff and the time in the industry. Because of that boom, there were like hundreds of these small publishers who were cropping up all over the place, and one of them was called Lightning Comics. I don't know if you remember them, but this was been like 1993 or 94 or something like that, and they actually gave me some work on one of their series at a time when I was, like, definitely not ready. Like, I was extremely young, and I wasn't skilled enough to, in my opinion, retrospectively, to be doing professional work. But it was a really good training ground, because I had to produce a lot of art for the few issues that I did, and I got better by the end of it.
What was the name of the comic?
There were two. The first one was called Judgment Day, and the second one was called Purge, but it was spelled P-E-R-G.
All right, the Purge and Judgment Day. We'll have to look them up.
Yeah,
we might even have some.
Don't bother. Actually, my very first published work was from Now Comics, which you might actually remember. They were big.
Yeah, that one I do. I didn't remember Lightning.
Yeah, I did a couple of Green Hornet covers for them, which I was never actually paid for because they were notorious for not paying people. But I did, at least one of them was published, maybe two, I don't know. But those are around somewhere, and they're also terrible.
So then what? You didn't actually have any schooling for your art. Is it all homegrown?
It's yeah. I did go to I went to the Ontario College of Art part-time for a year and took some illustration and figure drawing classes, and those were not unhelpful, but it was like 1 or 2 times a week for I think for a year. That's the only actual art schooling I've had. And then I actually went to university. Brendan and I went to the same school. We went to the University of Windsor together and I took visual arts, and I actually flunked out of that course because I was not just kind of put off. It was first of all, I'm not really a school guy. Like I just don't do well in I do fine academically, but I don't do well with the structure of school and curriculums and stuff like that. So if there's something I want to learn, I love learning, and I love doing deep dives into different things that I don't know about and just, accruing information. But the rate at which school like that works just never fit with my style of learning. So the fine arts program was at the university level was very focused on fine arts, which I was like only half interested in. And also the parts of it I was interested in were, just very short chunks of the year. So I didn't get much out of it, and I just kind of stopped caring or attending. And also at the time, like comics were extremely frowned upon in that course. So like I was all the stuff that I really wanted to do or was interested in were I would kind of catch a lot of flack for. So it was
which is so strange, because nowadays it's crazy when I'm getting calls or having people come in and say, hey, I just assigned all of these comic works, can you make sure there is plenty in stock for our classroom? And it's just like it's such a change.
Yeah, if that was happening in universities back then, I don't know where it would have been, because we were discouraged from it was considered commercial, disposable commercial art, and the professors wouldn't give it any respect at all.
Okay, and despite that, I mean, well, maybe because of that, you went out and did your own thing.
Yeah.
And you did what? You did Lightning Comics. You did Now.
I did Now Lightning Comics, and then my next work was some stuff for Marvel. I sent submissions. I did the old submission package shipment to a bunch of different editors at Marvel, and I got work for their doing stuff for their licensing department. Like they had, I think they called it Custom Comics. There was a name for it. It might have been Custom Comics, but it was the first work I did for Marvel was a Jubilee one shot. It was like an 8-page story or something like that in some comic for like the NAACP or something. I can't remember what it was, but it was
interesting. I don't remember that.
No, it wouldn't. It wasn't something that would have come out in retail stores. It would have been a comic done for some organization who'd commissioned a thing. Like if when people were making comics, like comics that would go like ship with action figures and things like that. I did some of those. I did some Ghost Rider comics that came with some toys. Things like that, like comics that would come with video games, like that. That's what that department was. So I did some of that stuff, and then after that, I was offered the Daily Bugle miniseries, which I did. That was I think my first like Marvel series work, and that was a black and white series written by Paul Grist, who's fantastic. And yeah, it was basically about like the people at the Daily Bugle doing their jobs, like a lot of what's his name, Ben, what's the Daredevil news
And
character?
Eric?
Ben Urich, yeah, that's right. So that was interesting, and then that just kind of like spun off into other things. Like I've done like a variety of things over the years for Marvel, and then I ended up doing mostly DC stuff as of around 2000, 2001 or so.
Okay, and that spun out of you just sending in the submission back then.
Oh yeah, or going to shows and showing people work. But once you're sort of established and have a relationship with different editors, I mean, the work seems to just. I mean, I haven't looked for work. I can't remember the last time I looked for work. It's just you know, I'll do a miniseries or something, and then get offered stuff fairly regularly. Like a lot of it I can't do, so I had to start turning stuff down and just taking cover work, especially now because my hands are full with my own thing.
Which of course we'll get to. But so okay, so you around 2001 you started predominantly working with DC. And
that was as a result of I had been doing little things for Marvel here and there, and then I talked to I was at a convention, and I ended up just chatting with Eddie Berganza, who was the editor of the Superman titles at the time, and I just was really, I don't remember what he could describe it better, but I remember being pretty passionate about about the character, about Superman, and he called me up after that and asked me if I wanted to do a Superman thing, and I did the arc of. Well, I think I did an issue of one of the Return to Krypton things, and then after that the crossover where Mr. Majestic comes to Metropolis. There's like a Superman Wildstorm crossover, which was really fun. That was a fun a few issues, and then that led to the Mr. Majestic Majestic miniseries. That was like 5 or 6 issues or something, which I did, and then it was like a lot of stuff at the Superman office, yeah, just various things for DC following that.
Okay, which
Teen Titans Year One,
and that was a really fun one.
Yeah, that
was Wolfman who did the writing on that, correct?
Amy Wolfram.
Okay.
Amy Wolfram, who is a writer. She's a writer for animation. She wrote the Teen Titans Go TV show. Yeah, so I met her through there. She was great. I think she's writing more stuff now. I think she's doing some of the upcoming DC superhero girls stuff.
Okay, sweet. So you bounced around, did a number of different things with DC, and I imagine since you mentioned the editors, was it usually under like the same editors?
A lot of it was, but then sometimes editors would come and go, and sometimes I'd get hit up by different editors to do different things, and then like some editors would leave DC and go to Marvel, and I'd end up doing stuff for them because I had a relationship with them already. So.
That is very nice, especially when you have a gig, you need to move on to something else. It's nice to hear that there's a kind of a stability built in with that once you have a good working relationship. Yeah,
I think so. I don't know, it's not really guaranteed stability, but there's always the fear that as you get older, your style will go out of favor, or you won't be able to get work in the same way, which is something we see all the time. I mean, they're really fantastic writers and artists from like the 80s and early 90s who are just not getting work anymore for whatever reason. So that's a constant concern. Less so when you start doing creator-owned stuff, because then you're more in control of your output.
It's true, and it sounds like especially since you're self-taught, you talked about like just delving into things you want to learn. It sounds like you're continually morphing your art, so it's not like you were going to look back and see the exact same thing in 10 years.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, you never know. You just never know. Like I think there's a whole new crop of comic book creators out there who just grew up on the web, and I really envy them. I envy their ability to interpret things in a way that is outside of the established medium, or like the traditional look of comics that you and I would have grown up with. Excuse me. I envy their ability to break these rules, or to ignore a lot of the rules that we grew up with. And I find myself, I find their work really exciting and interesting and fresh, and I struggle to, I try to adopt some of those traits, but it's difficult to untrain yourself from certain habits. So
well, you guys have a pretty fresh approach and a really good team on ISOLA, though.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, I've been honing that look for a while, so I think it's really come into its own. So I think we're okay. I think we're safe for a while anyway. Before
we'll
become too irrelevant.
We'll hold off on ISOLA because I wanted to save that one for last. But over at DC, one of the books, Gotham Academy, I still can't keep that thing on the shelf.
Oh, that's amazing to hear. That's fantastic to hear. Yeah, someone posted on Twitter recently, actually, Clark from DC, Clark Bull, who's our PR guy on Gotham Academy. He posted something about it the other day. And there's always a huge response to any Gotham Academy stuff that goes on social media. There's a fan base for it that's really loyal and really interested, and I can't. Part of me can't believe it, because it seems like we were really, really blessed to be able to do that book the way we wanted it. It was like I've never experienced a working situation like that before in corporate comics, where three friends can just kind of make something up, and like Becky and Brendan and I basically just made that stuff up from nothing, and we're given the permission basically to work on it with really no oversight. I mean, we just made what we liked and what we wanted and sent it in, and I think it just the book sort of it just feels it feels like you can tell that we were having fun doing it, and it just feels like all of our personalities mixed up together, and I hope at some point we can do more of it. I'm just really happy to hear you say that people still get into it. I mean, the trades must do okay, right? I don't know, the issues never did spectacularly well, so it's nice to know that
really they didn't, because they did well in the shop here, but the trades are what we just can't keep on the shelf.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's really great to hear.
So then where did it come from? The three of you were working together. Is this because you obviously were friends? Did you sit down and draw together? How did it work?
Well, what happened was I had a studio in Montreal, and Becky Clunan joined that studio she was there for like a good year or two, and one day, and we literally sat, our desks were like connected, so we sat just across from each other, and and we had similar tastes also, and one day she got a phone call from Mark Doyle at DC, who had just left the Vertigo offices and was taking over the Batman books, and he was looking to just bring in some fresh voices for some of the Batman titles and create some new things, and make some stuff for some audiences that weren't being serviced, and one of them was the YA audience. And he called Becky and asked her if she had any thoughts about something she might do for a Batman book, and she said she might, but she couldn't draw it, and I was sitting right there, and she asked me if and Brendan was there too at the time, I think, just hanging out because he was also living in Montreal, and so she said she'd get back to Mark, and then the three of us talked about it. She said, and I agreed to draw this thing, and Brendan was going to co-write it with her because she didn't have a ton of time, and then between the three of us, we just made up Gotham Academy, and a lot of that was I think if it had just been Brendan and I, we would have steered it towards something more Batman related. But Becky really wanted to do this sort of YA boarding school thing, and once we got rolling with it, it was just so much fun making up those characters and backstories and things like that, and then leaning really heavily on Batman the Animated Series. That's a touchstone for a lot of those plot points and ideas and tertiary characters. Everything we did in that book design wise it owes a lot to the animated series.
That's great. And you've mentioned that it's a young adult. Kids can read it, but it didn't just appeal to the young adult audience. The adult audience has really had fun with it because it is really a fun book. And I think during that time, and especially leading up till now, Batman it took such a dark turn that if you wanted something with Gotham in it, that's the place to go if you're not looking for something to just, scare you.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I always considered Gotham Academy a horror book. It's a young adult horror book, in my opinion. That's the way I approached it and treated it. Those characters are really fun, and there's a lot of lighthearted stuff in it, but I think they only work because there's this backdrop of kind of gothic horror, and that's partly what makes Batman work as well. I think there are moments. I don't want to spoil anything for people who haven't read it, but there are moments in Olive's story arc that are like some of the payoffs to those plots are genuinely horrific and kind of frightening, but because of the style of the artwork and the sort of bubbly nature of Maps's character and their relationship, I think it all balances quite nicely. But I think there's some fairly scary stuff in there. But I mean, as a kid, I really liked scary stuff. Not horror, like gore horror movies or things like that, but I always really liked psychological thrillers and ghost stories, and I think that stuff's important to devour at a young age. Like all of the Grimm's fairy tales and old myths and things are semi-horrific, and I think that's informed a lot of how I approach all storytelling, really.
Did you get into H.P. Lovecraft?
Not really. I've read some of it, and I like it. I sort of just like the the way the prose flows, but I'm not like a big nerd for it or anything like that. Becky was more of a Lovecraft fan than I was.
So it did influence the horror side of it, just not from you.
The Lovecraft element is. Do you find there's a Lovecraftian element to?
I can see just a little bit in there, just with kind of the setting and the tone. Obviously brought down to quite a different level. But it is interesting that all three of you actually brought your own elements to this book, and that's what made it so successful.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the book it was if any of the three of us had not been involved. It would be a very different thing.
And it's neat too that I don't know what the behind the scenes thing is, but as far as I can remember, aside from that Lumberjanes crossover, they haven't just used it.
No, there were some I think there was like a Joker Endgame crossover that we kind of got pushed into a little bit, and actually a lot of people's favorite issue of that series is the Damian Wayne issue, and it was sort of it was kind of a crossover thing we didn't really want to do either, because I personally would have preferred to keep more of the traditional superhero stuff out of the book and let those kids shine. But I don't know, it was a kind of fan service, and it worked. I mean, people love it, and of course Helen Chen illustrated the issue. It's brilliant. So it's also just really fun.
That's still not a lot of interruption though, so that's not bad at all.
No, in that case, it merged pretty well into the setting and the story, because it was so, still very school based. But once you start putting like the Joker and like really nasty villain stuff in it, I think it sort of takes it out of it.
All right, that's fair enough. Well, let's lead into what you're working on right now. We've made them wait long enough. Most of you who come into this shop will know it, because when you're looking for something new, it's one of the first ones we go to, not only because it is a beautifully drawn book, but it's a fantastic story. It's a fantasy story, which there's really not a heck of a lot of out there. Image tends to go more towards the science fiction. But I mean, my God, you and Michelle are just like peanut butter and jelly.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I met Michelle, and maybe she probably told you this story, but I met her at the Toronto Comic Arts Festival a few years ago, actually right before Gotham Academy came out, because I was there. I don't remember what I was doing there, but I had a table there, and she came up and introduced herself, and we talked a little bit, and she told me she was she painted backgrounds for animation, and my ears perked up, and I thought, and because I was in the headspace of sort of pre-production on Gotham Academy, and we had a colorist for Gotham Academy, a really great colorist named Romain Gachet, who colored the first issue and a half, I think. And but I said, I mean, I saw Michelle's work, and I said, I just took her information. I said, if we ever need another colorist, let me contact you. And sure enough, as of issue 3, I think we got her on board. And then I've just never let go of her. I don't want to ever not be working with her, because in addition to being a fantastic colorist, she's also like a really great person. We collaborate really well. I think we learn things from each other. And yeah, she's amazing. She's great.
That is cool. So with ISOLA, we actually had somebody ask, what was the genesis of your inspiration for ISOLA?
Well, it's a long one. It goes back to Brendan and I had been working on, when we first started making up stories. But I'd mentioned the Chicago Comic-Con before. We used to drive, I think it was 9 or 10 hours from the Niagara region to Chicago to go to this comic book show. And the two of us would just get in a car and drive all night, and then hit the show first thing in the morning. And on these drives there and back, we would talk a lot about stories. We'd make up stories. And one of the stories we concocted was called Miki. And it was an epic, it was an epic sort of fantasy, semi-futuristic fantasy story about these two girls, like these two friends, and a lot of other stuff. There are many different genres kind of like squashed into there. And we worked on this thing for several years. In fact, it almost got published by Image. We put together, I drew a whole bunch of pages of it. We pitched it we talked to a bunch of different people, different publishers. Image, I think, had agreed to publish it, but they wanted it in a different format. And then we sort of got waylaid. I ended up having to do other work, and it never got made. But the essence of it, of the relationship of those characters, went into what ISOLA is now. Basically, the essence of it went into everything we've done since then. Like there are elements of those characters in Gotham Academy in the Olive Maps relationship. And then now in ISOLA with the Rook and Olin relationship, it's sort of a similar thing. ISOLA is more tonally akin to what we wanted to do back then, but now I think we're just way more capable of doing it. And we're older, we're more skilled, we're more comfortable with the kind of work we want to do and the kind of stories we want to tell. And when you're very young and you create an epic story for yourself, it's really difficult to get that off the ground. It's difficult to complete anything, much less a huge story, when you're still trying to learn the ropes. So the genesis of ISOLA was partly that, and partly that I was doing all of these these Marvel and DC series and things like that, and I was fairly well known for my superhero work, but I was also becoming pretty well known for my webcomic, which is called The Abominable Charles Christopher. And that was a weekly webcomic I do. I still do it, actually. I stopped. I was kind of on hiatus for a while, but it's weekly again now. And that was I noticed it was a very different audience because that webcomic is about talking animals. It's more of like a strip format gag strip, even though it also leans into horror and melancholy stuff. And I said to Brendan that I was like, I wanted some way to bridge those audiences because the kind of work I wanted to do was sort of like an amalgam of those two things. Like I like adventure stories and heroic mythic stories, and I also like drawing these environments and animals and creatures and things like that. And so he thought about it and came back one day. We had coffee, and he pitched me this story about a woman escorting a tiger across the countryside, a queen who's been transformed into a tiger, and it was perfect. And I was just like immediately on board. And then we started fleshing out that idea.
Okay, now since you touched on it, what is the nice little compact synopsis for people who don't know what ISOLA is?
It is a story about it's a fantasy adventure story about a queen who's been magically transformed into a tiger, and her captain of the guard / friend who is trying to escort her across the world to this place that may or may not exist called ISOLA, which is supposed to be the entrance to the underworld, like the island of the dead, to try to get her transformed back into a human again.
Okay, and the first trade is available now. We're 2 issues in on the new arc.
2 issues in. I'm working on the 3rd one now, which is issue 8. Yeah, issue 8. I think issue 7 just came out like a week or so ago, right?
It did, just a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. So I'm working on issue 8 currently, and so there'll be we're doing a trade every 5 issues. So the 2nd volume will be out later this year. First volume, I'm extremely proud. I'm extremely proud of all of it, but I really like the way that book came together. I think it's a nice. We try to make it a nice read in issue format as well as in trade format. So. Yeah.
Okay, that is fair. And then somebody else has asked, always curious about creator-owned properties. What level do each one of you have in the creative process, from the writing to you putting it on to the paper to Michelle changing colors?
Well, so the way it works in this case, I don't know how other people work, but Brendan and I start by just talking a lot about the story we want to tell. And we're co-writing this series, so it's just a lot of conversation back and forth about, for example, we start with an idea of, well, we know what the whole story is, so then we kind of narrow it down to, okay, what chunk of story is going to go in each volume? Let's say this is like a 5-volume series, maybe, right? We start talking about what are our beats for our story beats for those volumes, and then narrow it down to what are the beats for each individual issue. And when we're writing an issue, we talk about what that issue is going to be, where it's going to start and finish, the kind of information we need to get across in the story. And then we'll write up a very loose breakdown. Usually we use a Google Drive. We just have a shared document. And we write a loose breakdown of what is in the issue. And then one of us, like Brendan, will then flesh it out a bit more so that I have more to work from in terms of like, temporary dialogue and stuff like that people might be saying, just to make sure we're not missing anything, like missing chunks of information that people might need. And then I sit down and I draw every page, and I might change things here and there in the story as I'm drawing it, or write in new pages or change things, which happens quite a bit. And then as I finish each page, I send it off to Michelle with a few notes. And Michelle does a pass on the colors. And then usually she sends us usually she'll do what she calls like a color script, which is like a rough color version of each page that she puts together in literally in a strip, like each page is kind of like put side by side, and you can see the flow of colors. I don't know if you've ever watched any making of, like, behind the scenes documentaries or movies or animation where they will show you this kind of thing, but it'll show you basically the color guide from scene to scene, and you can see how the colors flow through scenes, whether it's night or day, how the moods change, and it's extremely helpful to see that. And we make decisions based on that too. So then Michelle will color it. Then Brendan and I will do a final, based on my finished page, we'll do a final scripting pass where we kind of get on the phone again and hammer out the final, like the actual dialogue. And then it's lettered by Aditya Bidikar, who is a fantastic letterer, a wonderful guy. He lives in India. And he's lettering a bunch of things now. He lettered Motor Crush also. And he does a lettering pass on it. And then typically for us, what happens is once we read the whole thing with the first color pass and the first lettering pass, Brendan and I will usually hack away like a third of what's there. We'll just like remove a good chunk of that dialogue, because we're going, with this book, we're going for a very contemplative, subtle tone, like a tone of realism, in that we don't want the characters to be speaking expositionally in ways that a person might not actually speak. So a lot of the communication, especially when you're dealing with two characters, one of whom can't speak, one of whom is a tiger. Most of the book is a woman and a tiger who doesn't speak. So a lot of the communication is silent or done through body language or facial expressions. So so a lot of unnecessary dialogue gets cut, which is why if you look through any of those books, like there's often very little dialogue per page, or sometimes no dialogue for several pages at a time. And so then, we'll do a final lettering pass. I'll usually go over the coloring, the colored pages, and sometimes edit or change some things, and then it gets sent off to the printer, and that's our process basically.
Okay, so there's not like a one direction. It looks like it really is a collaborative
it's
effort.
The way we work. It's pretty collaborative in every sense. We don't have an editor either, so we're kind of we're making a lot of choices for ourselves on the fly, for better or worse. Like I find personally that despite the sort of underabundance of text on the page, like it's still a fairly dense read for me, because like I'm spending a lot of time with subtext, which is like the actual communication that's going on between those characters.
No, I would definitely agree with you. There's a lot to take in aside from just the text. And like you were talking about, one of the big things is the facial expressions are extremely important in the way everything's interpreted.
Yeah, and it's tough because I've got to, like some of those facial expressions are on a big cat, so it's there's a lot of nuance to convey there that sometimes is not so simple.
Well, I'm glad that you guys took a chance on this property, because it has turned out very well. It's been a lot of fun to read. Just like Gotham Academy, those trades are gone constantly. So please keep up the beautiful work and do not let go of Michelle.
Oh no, we will not. Actually, I should mention, Michelle's just put out, for anyone who's interested. She put together her own zine of her coloring process. There's a very short one just about how we make ISOLA. And if you Google her name is M Sassy K on Twitter and Instagram and everything. You can find that information, and you can get that zine. But she just sent me yesterday a proof for an extended one, which is like a much more in-depth look into her coloring process, which is fascinating for me, and I think would be really interesting for anyone else who wants to see how that book actually comes together. So that should be out soon.
Okay, that's awesome. We will keep our eyes open. And thank you very much, sir. I don't want to keep you much longer. I know you're busy. It's early for you, so you still have to get to work. But is there any one piece of advice that you might be able to impart to somebody who wants to do what you're doing, doesn't necessarily know where to begin, or just some piece of advice?
My advice is usually just to start your own thing and put it on the web. That's what I tell everyone. Put it online. Make yourself. It doesn't have to be a fancy web page. Just put it up there. Set yourself a schedule. Produce, one episode a week or one episode a month, whatever it is. Just make a schedule and stick to it, and then see how it goes. Because you'll become better by leaps and bounds the more you do it. You'll get an idea. You'll get feedback from it. Whether it's from just peers or people you know, or for all you know, you'll gain a huge audience. I just think it's important to be doing your own thing that you own, and getting out there in front of as many people as possible, because the publishing landscape is so much different now than it used to be. There are no real gatekeepers to making comics. I mean, you can go and do whatever you want for free and build your audience and make your own books and publish them through Kickstarter. You could form a direct relationship with retail, get your books into stores. I mean, there are a million ways to do things now that didn't exist before. So I wouldn't waste. My advice is to not waste a bunch of time pitching to publishers right now. Just get your stuff done, find your voice, hone your craft, put the stuff out online, and see what happens, and finish it. That's the other thing.
And it is a completely different landscape. Do you find, because I like the idea of just putting yourself out there and actually putting it out on the web, do you find that you find yourself a little more accountable once there's people who are now expecting to see more stuff?
Absolutely. I've said many times, like monthly comics are really difficult for me, because it's a schedule that I can't quite, I'm never quite comfortable in it. But I've never been more disciplined than when I was doing my webcomic once a week. Like, I did that thing for 7 years, week in and week out, without missing an episode. And I surprised myself by doing that. And I think I surprised a lot of other people. And it also helped me schedule myself in other ways too, for other types of comic work. So it's something I'd like to adopt in a larger way. Like, I think being able to put your stuff online, even if it's something that's being published in print form, I think it's a good idea to be able to have that online as well while you're doing it, just as you said, to keep yourself accountable and to keep yourself energized and interested in getting feedback all the time. And then, still put it out in print, but why not do it all? Is my thinking about it.
That's fair enough. Well, thank you very much for joining us tonight. I appreciate it. Like I said, I know you're busy, but it was nice talking to you. And I did want to say, it took me about halfway through this video before I realized you were wearing a UN Spacey hat.
Yeah, man, that's my Macross Robotech. I actually made this hat. I got this patch from a store here in Japan. One of the guys just gave it to me because they saw I had a little Macross keychain, and I sewed it onto this hat, and it's my favorite.
That's great. That is great. Yeah. And I mean, God, isn't the cover of it your Twitter have a Robotech?
Yeah, it's a Max and Miria image from the movie, from the Do You Remember Love?
It's not a bad place to start. And I was really disappointed when they did not let you, or I don't know what not let you, but when you didn't continue doing the Robotech covers with the RDF symbol in the back, because if we could have got everybody, we could have got Sammy, Kim, just like the whole line.
I would have done them. I would have been happy to do them. That was those guys at Titan were really, really great, really nice to work with. And I would have, I was doing those just mostly as a fan. And I said I wanted to at least do a Max cover because he's my favorite character. But
didn't quite make it.
No, I think they were all variant covers, so maybe they just stopped doing variants. I'm not sure what happened, but yeah, I wish I could have done those. I would have done every Macross character if I would have been allowed to.
Well, again, thank you,
on
sir.
my website anyway, if you wanna check them out.
Did you do concept art for ones that weren't?
No. I mean, I probably have drawing, like I've probably got like all sorts of Max Sterling Robotech drawings flying around on my hard drive, but they're not on the website. The published covers are up there too. I just rebuilt my website and refreshed it recently. So if you go to karlkerschl.com, there's a bunch of art up there, and a mailing list you can subscribe to if you want to be notified about commissions and things like that.
That's perfect. The same name across all the social media?
Yep, that's right.
All right, that's easy to find. Well, again, thank you, and thank you to everyone who participated, who watched, and who continues to watch this afterwards. When you're in the shop, ask myself or anyone else who's here where Gotham Academy is, where no, Titans Year One, I don't think is in print anymore. Where
they just
ISOLA
reprinted
is.
It actually. They reprinted it recently. Yeah.
Okay, well, then ask us about that too.
Yeah.
And we'll point you guys in the right direction of where to look. So enjoy the rest of your day, sir.
Thank you. You too. And thanks again for having me on.
Most definitely. Thank you for being on.
Okay. Bye-bye.